I have worked in hotels for 31 years, and I can tell you the exact moment a room changes. Not the applause, not the tears, something that comes before all of that. A hell breath, a kind of collective stillness, as though every person in the hall has forgotten, at the same instant, what they were about to say. I have seen it perhaps 4 times in my career. Only once did it last long enough to stop my own heart. That was the night of the Harwood Grand's annual patrons' dinner. The Gold Ballroom, third Friday of November. 12 tables of 8, white linen, the good chandelier lit. I had been maitre d' there for 11 years, and the patrons' dinner was the evening I earned my salary 3 times over. A room full of people who donated money to the arts and expected to be treated accordingly. Arthur DeVille was at table 1. He was always at table 1. He was a private banker, heavy set, the kind of man who wore his confidence like a second dinner jacket, effortlessly and at all times. He had given generously to the city conservatory for many years, and he never let the room forget it. By the time the dessert plates were going out, he was already holding court, his voice carrying past the floral centerpieces to the tables nearest his, telling a conductor at table 3 that the program last season had been, in his estimation, perfectly adequate. Our scheduled pianist that evening was a young man named Perry Holloway, and at 8:30, I received a note in the kitchen that he had a broken finger, a cycling accident that afternoon. I read the note twice, set it on the pass, and walked very calmly into the linen cupboard and closed the door for 30 seconds. Then I walked back out and began to think. The grand piano had been tuned that morning. It sat on its low dais at the far end of the ballroom, lid open, the chandelier light catching the lacquer. It had not been touched. By 9 o'clock, the tables were finishing their port, and the room was beginning to notice the silence from the dais. DeVille noticed it first. "Rowan," he called to me from table 1. I crossed him. "Where is the pianist?" I explained. "Broken finger. My sincerest apologies." We would, of course, but he was already waving his hand. "Rowan, this is the patrons' dinner. One does not attend the patrons' dinner to sit in silence." He turned to the conductor at table 3, drawing him into it with a look. "Is there no one in this building who can play?" I was about to offer the evening's apologies and suggest something else when I heard a small sound behind me. A teacup set down on a trolley. I turned. Lena Chow was clearing the side table near the service door. She was one of our banquet assistants, 24 years old, slight, hair pulled back, plain black uniform. She had been working the patrons' dinner for the past 3 years, and I don't believe any of the guests had ever looked directly at her. She had not spoken, but her hand had gone still on the trolley handle, and her eyes were on the piano. DeVille followed my gaze. "That girl," he said, not to me, to the room, or to himself. He looked her over. Something shifted in his expression, the way a man looks when he has thought of something he considers amusing. "Can she play?" The question was not really a question. I opened my mouth. "I'll tell you what," DeVille said, setting down his port glass. He had everyone's attention now. The near tables had gone quiet. "I'll make it sporting. If that young woman can sit down at that piano and play the Liebstrom, Liszt the third one, cleanly start to finish, no stumbling, I will write a personal check to the conservatory for £10,000. Tonight, in front of everyone." He smiled. "And if she cannot, well, we'll have a pleasant conversation about the program instead." He looked at Lena the way a man looks at a window he expects to stay closed. The room stirred. Someone at table 6 gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. I saw the conductor at table 3 set down his glass carefully. I turned to Lena. I meant to tell her she was not obliged. I meant to make this very easy for her to decline. But when I looked at her face, I saw something I had not expected. She was not frightened. She was perfectly still. Her eyes moved from the piano to DeVille, and then to me, and there was something in them. Not anger and not nerves, something much quieter. A decision already made. "I'll play," she said. The room did not laugh. Not quite, but there was a sound, a murmur that leaned in the direction of amusement. DeVille spread his hands. "Well then, by all means." 2 guests at table 2 leaned together and spoke behind a napkin. The conductor at table 3 watched Lena with an expression I could not yet read. She came out from behind the trolley. She set her white service cloth on the side table, smoothed the front of her uniform once, and walked to the dais. The room settled into the particular quiet of people waiting to be entertained by something failing. I saw DeVille pick up his port glass again. He was already composing the anecdote he would tell afterward, the girl who tried. Lena sat on the bench. She adjusted it 2 inches, which nobody does unless they know exactly where they need to be. She set her hands in her lap. She looked at the keys for a moment. Not nervously, I thought, more the way a person looks at something they have missed. A long look. Then she rolled her shoulders almost imperceptibly, took a breath, and placed her hands on the keyboard. The opening of the Liebstrom number 3 begins softly. 3 notes, rising like a question asked without urgency. Most people, when they attempt it for the first time in public, rush. The nerves push them forward. Lena did not rush. She played those first 3 notes as though she had all the time in the world, and the room, which had been doing what rooms do, rustling and settling and preparing to be politely disappointed, went silent. Not politely silent, suddenly silent. She played the first phrase through, and I watched it happen. The man at table 2, who had been leaning toward his companion, straightened in his chair. The woman beside him put down her port glass. At table 5, a trustee of the conservatory board, a woman named Mrs. Alderton, who had attended the patrons' dinner for 20 years and who I had never seen do anything precipitously, turned fully in her chair to face the piano. The Liebstrom is a deceptive piece. It begins with something that sounds almost simple, a melody that rises and falls like a slow tide, and then it opens beneath you. The bass deepens, the right hand floats higher, and somewhere in the middle of it the music stops being a pleasant thing and becomes something else, something with weight to it, something that has been waiting. Lena played it, as though she had been waiting too. Her right hand sang each phrase with a clarity that I have since learned to call inevitable, the sense that no note could have been different. Her left hand held the ground. The pedal work was precise enough that the sustained notes rang without blurring, and in that resonance the room seemed to grow larger, the chandelier light to deepen. I had been standing near the service door. I found I had stepped 3 paces into the room without noticing, my notepad still open in my hand. At table 1, Arthur DeVille was very still. The middle section came, the passionate outpouring, the arpeggios climbing through the upper register, Lena's hands crossing and opening as the music lifted into the part of the piece that makes people, if they're listening properly, feel briefly and inexplicably young. At table 4, a woman pressed 2 fingers to her mouth. The trustee, Mrs. Alderton, had turned so fully in her chair that her back was to her table. And then, this is the thing I have never managed to describe adequately in 31 years. Lena did something with the returning melody. The Liebstrom closes by bringing back the opening theme, quieter, having been through what it's been through. Most players bring it back gently, apologetically almost, as though trying not to disturb what went before. Lena brought it back with a kind of certainty. Not loud, if anything, softer than the opening, but each note landed as though it had earned its place. The phrase came to its end, the final chord dissolved into the air, and she held the pedal until the last overtone faded. The silence that followed was not the silence of people waiting to know whether to applaud. It was the silence I described at the start. I counted, I don't know why, I counted to 4 before the first sound. It came from table 3, the conductor, on his feet, his hands together. Then the rest of the room rose. I have heard a great deal of applause in hotel ballrooms. The applause for Lena Chow that evening was not polite, and it was not proportionate. It was the applause of people who had just been somewhere they had not expected to go and were not quite ready to come back from. Mrs. Alderton was on her feet. The woman at table 4 was wiping her eyes without appearing to notice she was doing it. 2 of the younger guests at table 8 began to call out, something I have never before allowed in the Gold Ballroom, and which I allowed without any instinct to stop it. Lena sat at the bench with her hands in her lap, looking at the keys, and she received it all quietly, the way she had done everything else that evening. I made my way to table 1. Arthur DeVille was standing. He was not applauding. His hands were at his sides. His face had the look of a man working something out that is taking longer than he expected. He reached into his breast pocket and produced his checkbook. He stood there for a moment, then he looked at me. "Is there a pen at the piano?" he said. I provided one. He walked to the dais. The room's applause softened into a kind of murmured attention as it understood what was happening. Deville reached the piano bench where Lena still sat, and he did something I've turned over in my mind many times since. He did not stand above her to write. He placed one knee on the dais step, rested the checkbook on the piano's music desk, and wrote. The conductor, watching from table 3, began to applaud again, slowly. Others joined. Deville tore the check free and held it out to Lena. She took it with both hands, as one accepts a gift. He said something to her, quietly, so that only she and perhaps the conductor could hear. I never learned what it was. She nodded once, very slightly, and looked back at the keys. I went back to the service door. The room was still on its feet. After a moment, Lena set her hands to the keys again, this time without being asked, without any arrangement, as naturally as drawing breath, and began to play. Chopin, a nocturne, C-sharp minor, slow and moonlit, the notes spaced with the patience of someone who has learned that the silence between notes is as important as the notes themselves. She played it as though the whole evening had been building toward this second piece, as though the Liszt had been the argument, and this was the conclusion, private and undecorated. They let her play for another 20 minutes. Not one person at any of those 12 tables moved toward the door. I've thought about that evening many times, about the way Lena Chow walked from the trolley to the piano, as though she had made that walk before, many times in another life which she had, I later learned. 3 years at the city conservatory before her mother's illness, then the money gone, and work to be found, and the conservatory not easily re-entered once the door swings shut. She had played in the kitchen, she told me afterward, on quiet afternoons. The prep cooks never mentioned it to anyone. I have thought, too, about Arthur Deville. He kept his word with grace, and I respected that. A man reveals himself completely in the moment he is wrong about something, and Deville, to his credit, was not small about it. But the thing I come back to all these years later is the silence after that last chord. For seconds, maybe 5, before the conductor rose. In all my years behind that service door, I learned that the measure of a performance is not the applause. The applause tells you what people thought. The silence tells you what they felt. That silence in the gold ballroom of the Harwood Grand on a cold Friday night in November was the longest I have ever witnessed. And the girl who made it had been clearing our dessert plates 10 minutes before.